questions of all candidates. I'll start with the middle one. It asks, of the recommendations made by the Commission on Fiscal Stability and Economic Growth, that's the Petroselli and Jim Smith Commission that publicized findings back in March, which do you believe should be implemented, and how would you go about doing so? Well, gentlemen, I don't think we need any of them. I've read all 5, studied the whole 80-page booklet, and here's why. Things are not that dire, because we have a much easier solution in front of us. We can easily downsize with no pain. That's because we start finally removing the unnecessary functions of government and have private individuals and private groups take care of these the way they did 100 years ago, and private charities and mutual aid societies flourished back in the teens and 20s. One reason why they have shrunk is that the government took over those functions. They did that in the 1930s, heart of the Depression, when Franklin Delano Roosevelt and other Democrats could get votes by saying the government will take over these, and they never leave. And those responsibilities expanded. Then the states got into the act, same thing. Government usurping the functions that never were meant for government to do. At the national level, a lot of these were unconstitutional functions. State of Connecticut has a very freewheeling constitution. It can do almost anything. I think it should do very little, because what it does, it rarely does well. What it does is at the command of legislators who are politically influenced, who don't always read bills, who don't pay attention when there's malfeasance. They investigate. They set up panels. And meanwhile, wrongdoing gets continued. Right doing happens when individuals, one at a time, small groups, maybe municipalities, fund things and monitor them better. They have more choice. Let that be the place, not the state of Connecticut, for the non-necessary stuff. So, how much is non-necessary? That's ultimately for the General Assembly, guided by voters, to decide. I will posit that it's probably close to 70% non-necessary. Okay? That includes education. But let's say you include education, because it is part of the Constitution, and how much funding is supposed to be required with it, I don't know. So maybe there's still 40% non-necessary. I say we start with the first 20. The 20% of non-necessary functions, the people receiving their benefit are still going to get well served, maybe even better served, because from the pocketbooks of we who do care, no longer being steered by government, we have money, we have direct influence, we have a smorgasbord of charities that can be laid out with state help to say, this is how you can channel your funds effectively. You decide. And small groups decide. That is the best distribution of funds. It is a free market in charities. Free markets always produce better results than controlled markets. I want to apply the beauty of the free market, the wealth of the free market, to the things that the government has kept for itself. Those who receive services will get better served, maybe with more money. If they've been receiving services badly, they'll have the option to move and have better providers of those services. It's a beautiful world. It's one that we used to have, and we can get back to it. My proposal is 3 and out. In 3 years, gentlemen, we don't need an income tax. We will have adequate, maybe even more funding than before, for the good non-necessary services. Then the necessary services that are left will have supremely more funding and better oversight, because there won't be as many of them. Okay, you have fewer 2 said, as governor, what actions would you take to address the state's financial and fiscal issues? Well, I kind of said the biggie. By eliminating non-necessary services, the government's fiscal balance sheet is automatically in the black. Okay? That $4.5 billion 2-year deficit, we don't have, because we can be saving $5 billion in 1 year, $10 billion over 2 years, and with it, yes, you have a tax cut. So, 3 and out is my scheme for the tax cut. 30% in the first year, 34% in the second year, 36% in the third year. We are done. We're back to a zero income tax, which we had up until 1991. And Connecticut was doing fine up until 1991. Okay? There's no doubt about it that economic drain coincided, and I do think there was cause and effect, with an imposition of a tax. Connecticut doesn't need it. So, I make the argument that we should do this faster rather than slower. Final question. What role do you perceive regional councils of governments play in helping address these issues? Do you favor providing COGS with the ability to raise funds directly through regional taxation? Answer simple. Privatize as much as possible. When government has so many functions, then there is a need for regionalism, because it's better than statewide. I'd like to see fewer government functions, and the regionalism becomes that of private entities. Some saying, we want to get together because we're doing kind of the same thing, not too far apart. Some municipalities saying, we want to get together because we're doing the same thing, not too far apart. But I want the individual municipality to decide. I want the individual funders that are private to decide. You don't want to add a layer of government when you don't have to. I do think that private decisions will recognize regionalism as a good thing. That when you have a hub around Waterbury, that Waterbury is a proper feeder of some things and a proper recipient of others, and it does make sense not to put up walls, but to take them down. It makes sense for certain government functions to be regionalized so that 8 towns doing the same thing might be able to do it with 3 clerks instead of 8. We used to have counties, but we got rid of them smartly because they were regional but weren't all that good as government entities. I don't think we need to go back to that. Individual towns with citizens that make individualized decisions. And speaking of regional as private, your paper where you're published is a perfect example of a private regionalized enterprise. It takes in the towns that seem to naturally cluster together. Good. Once again, you don't need government to make that happen. Thank you, Hartford Business Journal. By the way, I read you before I read the Current. I'm Stewart Greenstein. Thanks for the questions. I hope these have been happy